When looking to outer space, one can't help but ask the question, is there something else out there? Is there some other sentient organism that exists that would show us as humans whether or not we're truly alone in the universe? Well, in the case of the Universe of Prey 2017, the age-old question was answered. Though perhaps in the worst possible way, as the life that humanity found in Prey, otherwise known as Typhon, was something that was entirely unlike us, yet at the same time, was something ever so close to becoming us, and something that despite our efforts, could easily overtake us. To start this video, I think I should explain how while I have already made a video on the Phantom Typhon, which you can see in the top right hand corner of the screen, that to further delve into the various types of Typhon that exist, I would need to start with what exactly the Typhon are. To do this then, it would be best to look at when and how exactly humanity in the Universe of Prey found the Typhon, and subsequently how they interacted with them. That is to say that the first Typhon life forms were found by Soviet cosmonauts when the Verona 1 satellite, which was launched into orbit around the moon in 1958, stopped communicating with the Soviet Union. Upon sending a repair team up to investigate and repair the satellite, they found that the issue that had occurred had nothing to do with any exterior problems. Rather, it must have been something from the inside. The events that occurred next would mark a turning point not only for the mission, but also humanity. As when the cosmonauts went about investigating the interior, they were suddenly attacked by these black, blob-like creatures, killing everyone involved in the mission almost instantly. This initial exposure to these extraterrestrial forms of life resulted in them being dubbed Typhon, a name that hails back to the ancient Greek creature of the same name. As to why the name was chosen, perhaps comes down to a clever play by the developers on the ultimate nature of the Typhon lifeform, wherein the Greek Typhon was a representation of the past, or the old gods that had ruled over Greece, and the humans the new gods, fighting for their chance to overthrow the impossible enemy, and take their place as the rightful rulers of the universe. Or in other words, how Morgan's struggle against the Typhon mimicked that of Zeus's against the great serpent Typhon. Though, that all said, this is simply my own understanding of it, and shouldn't be taken all too seriously. Nevertheless, the name chosen for the species is one with a variety of meanings, and one that is eerily enough too accurate. After this discovery of the Typhon, the Soviet government can be assumed to have gone into a panic mode of sorts, trying to solve the crisis at hand, as they would go silent on the matter of the Typhon for 2 years before essentially begging the United States for help with containing them. Luckily, however, the United States, more so President John F. Kennedy, agreed to help, and the subsequent Kletko program began. The Kletko program wouldn't last long, however, as with the Soviet Union's decline and eventual collapse, as well as the attempted assassination of President Kennedy, the US would seize control of the operation, turning it into Project Axiom in 1964. It would be here on Project Axiom that a fair deal of research would be conducted on the Typhon, much of which is detailed in research logs in the game from the 60s and 70s. That is, up until the Pobeg incident, Russian for escape, in 1980, wherein the Typhon would breach containment and result in the station being shut down, only for it to then be secured by the megacorporation Transtar in 2025, which, with its brilliant minds and endless capital, would create perhaps the greatest understanding of the alien organisms to date. This understanding of the Typhon lets us delve into the next aspect of them, what they are and their life cycle. That is to say that the Typhon, as mentioned earlier, are simply aliens, but more so, aliens that are so vastly different to any other known organisms that it's hypothesized in the game that they don't even perceive time and space like us humans would. Rather, it's believed that the reason that they act the way they do, hunting humans that is simply because they are reacting to stimuli, and subsequently acting on what we can only assume to be their instinct. On top of this, we learn that for the most part, the Typhon lack many, if not all, of the same organs as organisms on Earth, but somehow manage to have a similar cognitive structure, containing things similar in design to neurons, hence the reason why it can be mapped and taken advantage of by humans. As for the physical shape and ability of the Typhon, just like with the rest of their makeup, it can be ambiguous, with the species ranging from simple arachnid-like mimics all the way to the ultra-complex apex. That said, there are some things that manage to stay as constants throughout all of the various forms that the Typhon can take, with the first being the shiny gray-black substance that makes up the outside of the organisms, and the second, their seemingly endoskeletal fuchsia-colored flesh. From what we can observe of the outer material, it appears to display the properties of gases, solids, and liquids all at once, all the while still maintaining some level of toughness. Toughness that not only explains the extremophile capabilities of the species, but perhaps how it managed to make its way to Earth in the first place. On the other hand, the flesh of the Typhon is something that is far less self-explanatory, perhaps functioning as a form of endoskeleton, as mentioned earlier, though that is speculation, and not much is known of its purpose. With the general structure and origin of the Typhon out of the way, we can delve, if only briefly, into their life cycle, and then the various abilities associated with the forms that they can take, though I won't be covering every type of Typhon. The first Typhon discovered, and what is believed to be the second, or perhaps first, depending on how you see it, step in the Typhon evolution process, is the Mimic, a small arachnid-like creature with the ability to morph its body, similar to something like a cuttlefish, into anything in its surroundings. Though, unlike something like a cuttlefish, mimics are able to do so with near-perfect imitation, with only the occasional vibration or sound being a giveaway to what they could possibly be in a given room. On top of this, mimics, as well as perhaps every other Typhon, share a host of abilities that allow for them to be faster, stronger, and generally better than anything that could hope to challenge them. Key word being generally. The other major types of Typhon we encounter throughout the game are things like the Weavers, Phantoms, Telepaths, Nightmare, and the Apex, with the Weavers being the natural progression for mimics, though they only occasionally occur, and things like Phantoms and Telepaths being the result of Weavers getting a hold of either husks, the byproduct from when a mimic devours an organic form of life, in the case of Phantoms, and mimics in the case of Telepaths, and essentially transforming them. As to the abilities these Typhon hold and what they look like, Phantoms tend to be humanoid in appearance, while holding various abilities that allow for them to move faster and attack in a more powerful way, whereas Telepaths and Weavers look to be large tentacled masses, with the Telepaths having the ability to control minds, and the Weavers, alongside making much of the other Typhon types, making an essential substance in the Typhon ecosystem, coral, which I'll talk about more in just a second. The final two previously mentioned Typhon, the Apex and Nightmare, are somewhat of an exception to the ecosystem. The Apex, in that it is not only exactly that, the Apex Typhon, the top of the food chain, but also in that it is both the beginning and the end of the Typhon life cycle, as it, or maybe they, as there may be more, consume everything once they arrive somewhere, and simply repeat the process of sending mimics off into space to do it again once they're done, with the Apex being so powerful that simply scanning it with a psychoscope results in Morgan's health dropping down to 1, and no data being collected on it. On the other hand, the Nightmare is an exception because it exists purely to defeat anomalies in the Typhon ecosystem, such as Morgan Yu, with its abilities evolving and adapting to combat the player character in the most effective way. Truly a chilling thing, given that no species in Earth's history has been able to adapt to changing stimuli that quickly. This talk on the Apex and Nightmare Typhon brings about the existence and importance of coral. Coral, as previously mentioned, is a bright yellow, wispy substance created by the Weavers. Its function is believed to be a way by which the Typhon communicate amongst each other, with the massive amounts of coral aboard Talos 1 in the game being believed to be what summons the Apex Typhon to the station in the first place, and perhaps even what it eats. That, however, is only what we're told about the coral, as the substance itself is capable of far more than what we're told at face value, though delving into that would be a bit of a rabbit hole. The Typhon, then, to somewhat round off this video, are a species of intergalactic predators that seemingly exist above or maybe even parallel to our reality, as not only are they capable of things beyond our own biology, such as levitation, time dilation, and psychokinesis, but they're also capable, as proven by the events of the game, of copying our biology, though with some help, going so far as to be able to experience humanity in some way, where in the past they couldn't do it at all. All of which leads me to the final conclusion, that the Typhon in Prey 2017, while a creative enemy to fight against and look at, are in all honesty a chilling reality that we may someday face as a species. Not only are they far more advanced in many ways to us, but they're far more physically superior in just as many ways, showing us that we as humanity can easily be removed from our spot in the food chain, and ultimately become the prey for a new apex predator. But with that said, it's about time to bring this video to an end. Exploring the concept of Typhon and laying a groundwork for future videos on them has been an interesting journey, but it's only going to get more interesting from here. So thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed the work I've done, then please leave a like, and if you really liked it, then maybe a sub. If you hated it though, leave a dislike, and tell me why. I'd love to hear your criticisms. And as always, this is Kuyo signing off. See ya.